Hi everyone, this video is brought to you by Aquaman Maintenance. We are about to discuss the idea of green hair algae in reef tanks. So let's start off with the causes. Number one, many people decide to leave their light on for excess amount of time. Some people leave them on for 10, 11, 12 hours of the day and sometimes even more. And that could be a huge problem because algae loves light, and when you leave your light on for a long period of time, it could very well cause green hair algae to grow in your tank. Another thing is upgrading your light fixture. Many times you could start off, let's say, with T5 light fixture and then decide to upgrade it to, let's say, metal halides. When you go from that type of lighting and switch it to a different type of lighting, especially when it's higher intensity, that could often cause, briefly, some green hair algae problems. Now, in my opinion, the main causes that we see of green hair algae are high nitrates and high phosphates. Now, when someone feeds either their fish or their corals too much food, and what do I mean by too much food? If you take a cup of let's say, mysis shrimp to feed your fish, and you pour in the whole cup, but they only eat about a half a cup's worth, then you're going to have all that excess food floating around in your tank, and then eventually turning into phosphates, and then phosphates turning into nitrates. And as we know, those two chemicals could be deadly to your corals. So, green hair algae loves phosphates, loves nitrates. So the more of it you have, the more green hair algae you'll have as well. Now, there's also a big problem that people have is filling up your tank with tap water as opposed to reverse osmosis or RODI water, reverse osmosis deionized water. Now, when you fill up your tank or do water changes with tap water, it is very, very susceptible to algae growth. So, what many people recommend is filling it up with reverse osmosis water, and even better than that, which is the best thing that you can do, is fill it up with reverse osmosis deionized water. Now, some stores happen to carry these type of filtration devices, and you could purchase water from them. But the easiest way of doing it is to go out, buy your own filter, either set it up yourself, have someone set it up for you. This way it's much more convenient, and you'll be saving a lot of money in the long run instead of going to these stores and purchasing their water. Now, let's also talk about preventative measures. Now, obviously you don't want this issue to happen, so what are ways to prevent it? Well, number one, do water changes. You got to do water changes every single week when you have a reef tank. Do 10-15% water changes, and if you do it once a week, 10 to 15%, for the most part, and again, this depends on the situation, what's in the tank, what's going on with the tank, usually you'll be in good shape. Now, many people decide that, you know what, this week and the next week, I'm going to take off. I don't want to deal with the fish tank. It's a lot of work. I love it, but it's a lot of work, and I just don't want to deal with it for the next 2 weeks. Not a good idea. You don't do a water change for 2 weeks. You don't clean the wall of your tank for 2 weeks. It's going to turn into an issue. You'll have nitrates starting to develop, sometimes, phosphates, and, sometimes other problems as well. Now, there is another way of preventing this from happening, is by having some snails, certain type of snails, and certain type of hermit crabs in your tank. hermit crabs and snails could help eat some of the algae and excess waste in your tank, which, you know, obviously the excess waste is going to turn into these deadly chemicals. You know, you want to clean your filter, and sometimes there are certain additives to put into your tank that might help it as well, although I don't necessarily recommend that. Now, if you take a look in this tank over here, this is a buddy of mine's tank, and he had a huge green hair algae problem. And, you know, right now, you know, again, this video camera is not so high tech, so you might have a little trouble seeing it, but he had on his rocks and walls tons and tons of green hair algae. It was literally a forest. And, you know, first of all, you know, obviously it was not appealing to people who came into his house and saw the tank. It does not look good, let me tell you. And also it is not good for the fish and the corals in there either. So, you know, it's a huge job to clean it, especially when it's out of control. So, you know, in the beginning, he did some water changes. He cleaned like a quarter of his tank, and then the green hair algae just grew back. It grows back literally like a weed, rapidly, just like that. So he decided one day that, you know what, I'm going to go all out. I'm going to clean everything. I'm going to clean, you know, the rocks. I'm going to clean the filter. I'm going to clean, you know, everything there is. And that's what he did. He cleaned all his rocks, scrubbed them down real good, and cleaned his filter. This way it'll reduce the nitrates, phosphates, and get rid of that, you know, green hair algae for the most part. So he did so, as you might be able to see. But, you know, also if you look on the walls and in certain crevices, you could still see some of that green hair algae that is beginning to grow back. Now, you know, you need to be able to prevent this for yourself when you have a reef tank. People put in thousands of dollars, sometimes even more than that, put in thousands of hours of time. And it's just not smart to let all that go to waste because you decide that you don't want to take care of your tank appropriately for a short period of time. It just doesn't work that way. When you have a reef tank like this, you have a responsibility, and believe me, it pays off. It's wonderful to look at. People love it, and it's great. But if you decide that you want to take a week or 2 or 3 off, you got to make sure that you have someone that knows what they're doing do those water changes for you. Feed the fish and corals appropriately for you. This way, you know, a problem such as this doesn't break out. Now, another thing besides cleaning the filter and doing water changes is scrubbing the walls, which he did not do such a great job at. You know, many times different types of algae start growing on walls, and you got to make sure you're cleaning your walls too. And really, every last thing in your tank, you know, you clean your protein skimmer, clean all the tubing that you have running through your tank and stuff like that. This guy happened to have bought a hang-on filter that he's keeping there temporarily. Obviously, it doesn't look so good in the front, but just there so it could suck up some of those, you know, thicker particles, you know, some of that thick green hair algae, some thick waste and debris. This way it could help as well. So guys, I really, really recommend that you do not let this happen to your tank, and, you know, just keep an eye on it and be responsible for it. This video has been presented by Aquaman Maintenance.